The starship Velaris moved silently through the void, its hull glowing softly under distant starlight. Inside, life followed rigid patterns. Every crew member had a task, every movement was counted, and every word was measured. Yet amidst all this order, there was one boy who seemed different, one small alien named Erix, whose presence carried a quiet warmth that humans couldn't ignore. Erix was small, smaller than most of the Velaris crew, with soft blue skin that shimmered faintly under the ship's lights. His large, dark eyes always seemed to be studying, not just looking, absorbing every detail in silence. His movements were gentle but precise, almost as if he had learned to survive in a world that demanded more than strength. And every day, he did one thing that caught attention. He ate 3 times a day, no more, no less. It wasn't hunger that guided him. It was habit, yes, but it was also a belief, a quiet ritual that gave him purpose. Every morning he would carefully divide his food into 3 equal portions: breakfast portion, mid-cycle portion, rest cycle portion. He would eat each portion slowly, appreciating it fully, never wasting a bite. Humans, who ate quickly and often without thought, noticed this unusual behavior. They didn't understand why a small alien would show such patience, such discipline, and above all, such care. One morning, as the metallic clang of trays echoed through the mess hall, a human engineer named Mara Hale paused to watch him. She leaned against a console, her arms folded, and said, half teasing, half curious, "You're really going to eat it like that? Every time?" Erix looked up, his eyes calm and unshaken. "Yes," he said softly, "I honor it." Mara blinked, trying to understand what he meant. "Honor food?" she asked, puzzled. "Not just food," Erix replied, almost whispering, "life itself." She laughed lightly, but there was something in his voice that made her stop. It wasn't arrogance and it wasn't fear. It was reverence. And for the first time, she felt the weight of something greater than routine, a quiet lesson hidden in his simple ritual. Life aboard the Velaris was not easy. The ship carried multiple alien species, each with their own strict customs, many of which were harsh or cold. They believed efficiency was everything. Emotions were distractions, kindness was weakness, and survival was measured only in statistics. Yet Erix did not follow those rules. Instead, he listened more than he spoke, helped more than he demanded, and carried a small light of hope that others didn't realize they needed. Humans, in particular, found him fascinating. He never competed for attention, never tried to assert dominance, never sought praise. Yet somehow, his presence made their hectic routines feel less suffocating, less mechanical. Mara watched him again as he carefully offered a small portion of his food to an elderly alien with trembling hands. The elder accepted it, surprised, but a gentle smile formed on his face. "Why are you always so careful?" Mara asked later quietly when they were alone near the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly before them, cold and silent. Erix didn't answer immediately. He tilted his head slightly, looking at the distant suns as if drawing words from the light itself. "Because everything matters," he said finally. "Even small things, even meals, even the way we treat others." Mara felt a strange warmth in her chest. Most humans aboard the ship were too busy worrying about schedules, rations, and orders to notice the little things. But here was a boy, an alien, teaching lessons without speaking them out loud. Every portion he divided, every careful bite he took, every small act of kindness became a quiet rebellion against the cold, calculating rules of the Velaris. And that was only the beginning. For the first time in her life, Mara realized that survival wasn't just about following rules or being strong. Survival was about heart. Survival was about compassion. And little did she know, the quiet discipline of this small alien boy, eating 3 times a day, sharing what little he had, honoring life in ways others ignored, would spark a chain of events that would change everything aboard the Velaris forever. The Velaris drifted closer to the dying star, its light growing brighter and harsher with every hour. Crew members moved quickly through the corridors, their faces tense. Alarms occasionally rang in the distance, a constant reminder that time was slipping away. Supplies were already low, and now reports came in that a crucial supply ship had failed to arrive. Panic did not strike immediately. It crept slowly, like a shadow stretching across the deck. Rations were cut first. Meals meant to sustain life became smaller. The rule of 3 times a day now seemed cruel. 3 meals had been reduced to 2, and soon only one small tray was distributed to each crew member. Hunger gnawed at everyone, some quietly, some with frustration. Arguments broke out over food. Some crew members hid portions for themselves. Others blamed the ship's command. Fear hung in the air like thick smoke. Through all of this, Erix moved calmly, as if the shrinking trays did not matter. He still divided his single portion into 3 parts: breakfast, mid-cycle, and rest. Each piece smaller than the last, yet he ate with the same reverence. The humans noticed. Mara watched as he carefully placed one tiny portion into the hands of an injured alien who could barely lift his tray. She swallowed hard. "You can't keep doing this," she whispered one day, bending down to him in the dim mess hall. "You'll starve. You need to eat more yourself." Erix looked at her calmly, his dark eyes steady. "Starving the body is not the same as starving the self," he said softly. Mara didn't understand at first, but as she watched him, she saw the truth in his actions. While others hoarded, Erix shared. While others complained, he comforted. A small portion slipped quietly to a human child frightened by the alarms. Another went to an elderly alien struggling to walk. He did not ask for thanks, did not seek recognition, and did not pause to question who noticed. His small acts seemed almost invisible, but slowly, like ripples in water, they began to reach others. Humans began noticing a strange effect. Morale, which had been fraying under the stress of hunger and fear, started to improve. Crew members began helping one another quietly, inspired by his example. Arguments over rations diminished. Individuals who had been silent started sharing advice and comforting words. Erix did not give speeches, did not issue orders, and yet leadership emerged naturally around him, not because of fear, but because of trust. One day, as the star outside blazed violently against the viewport, Mara asked him again, curiosity mixed with wonder. "Why do you keep doing this, Erix? Why share so much when you barely have enough for yourself?" He tilted his head, gazing at the swirling gases of the collapsing star. "Because," he said slowly, "life is not measured in what we take, but in what we give. Even when there is almost nothing, we must act as if everything matters." Mara felt a lump in her throat. She realized then that survival was not just about strength or logic. Survival was about heart. The boy was teaching them something older than any law or regulation, something deeper than any protocol: the value of care. The smallest gesture of kindness could spark hope, even in a ship surrounded by darkness. By the end of the cycle, the crew had begun imitating him. They divided their food carefully. They spoke more gently. They looked for others who needed help. Erix's quiet courage had begun to reshape the environment aboard the Velaris. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but undeniable. Something inside the human crew shifted. Where fear had been dominant, compassion started to grow. Where frustration had ruled, patience began to surface. And yet the threat outside continued. The dying star pulsed unpredictably, reminding all aboard that their fragile acts of kindness were happening on borrowed time. They were in danger. They were hungry. And yet, for the first time since leaving their homeworlds, the crew felt a strange unity, born not from fear, but from an alien boy who believed that even the smallest portion of food, shared 3 times a day, could change everything. Mara watched him again as he handed a tiny portion to a trembling officer, his calm presence like a quiet shield against panic. She realized that the boy's true gift was not in the food he shared, but in the courage he inspired. And in the cold, dying darkness of space, a spark had been lit, a spark that could not be extinguished by hunger, fear, or despair. Days passed aboard the Velaris, and the dying star outside grew brighter, bathing the corridors in a harsh, golden glow. Fear was no longer hidden. It lingered like smoke in every room. Crew members whispered about supplies, about survival, about who might not make it to the next cycle. Yet amidst all the tension, Erix continued his quiet ritual. 3 times a day he divided his food. 3 times a day he shared what little he had. And 3 times a day he reminded everyone that life could still hold meaning, even on the edge of disaster. Humans began noticing him more closely now. It started subtly, an engineer watching him slip a morsel to a weak alien, a medic seeing him pause to comfort a frightened child. And slowly, curiosity grew into something deeper, admiration, even wonder. Finally, the question broke through. Dr. Mara Hale approached him near the observation deck one evening. The stars stretched endlessly, spinning silently in the void. "Erix," she said, her voice low, "I have to ask, why 3 times a day? Why not eat everything at once like everyone else? Why share when you barely have enough?" Erix looked at her, his large eyes reflecting the glow of the distant sun. He hesitated, as if weighing the words against the rhythm of the universe. Then he spoke, softly, carefully. "Because," he said, "life speaks to us 3 times a day, once to remind us we are alive, once to test us, and once to ask us who we are becoming." Mara blinked, trying to comprehend. She had been trained to calculate risks, to follow protocol, to see the universe in numbers and probabilities. But here, in front of her, was a boy whose wisdom seemed older than any manual, whose courage did not demand recognition, whose kindness was quiet but unstoppable. "I don't understand," she admitted. "How can eating slowly or sharing food change anything?" Erix smiled faintly. "It changes everything. Fear spreads faster than fire. Panic can destroy the strongest ship. But kindness, patience, hope, they spread faster still. Even when no one sees, even when the universe seems empty, they grow. They create something no alarm or shortage can erase." The words lingered. Mara felt something shift in her chest, a warmth she had almost forgotten amid the cold discipline of the Velaris. She watched him again as he moved down the corridor, giving a small portion of food to an elderly alien struggling with his tray. Another child reached out hesitantly, and he gave her a tiny piece with a gentle nod. Each gesture was simple, almost invisible, but each carried weight that could not be measured by ration counts or efficiency scores. Soon, humans began imitating him, almost unconsciously. Engineers divided their snacks. Medics paused to comfort the worried. Officers checked on the quiet crew members who often went unnoticed. The simple act of sharing food became a small revolution, softening fear, reshaping attitudes, and inspiring courage. Even the aliens noticed. Some were skeptical at first, shaking their heads at what they called human weakness. But when their own rations dwindled and despair began to rise, they could not ignore the effect of Erix's actions. Crew members who had been at odds started helping each other. Arguments over food stopped. Even the coldest officers paused to admire the boy's courage. That night Mara stayed awake near the observation deck, thinking. She looked at the boy's quiet, calm figure and realized something profound. Survival was not just about strength or numbers. It was not about dominance or fear. It was about heart. And this small, quiet alien boy, eating 3 times a day, sharing tiny portions of food and living with intention, was teaching humanity a lesson older than any star: how to survive not just with the body, but with the soul. By the end of the cycle, the rule of 3 had begun to spread. It was no longer just Erix's habit. It became a rhythm for the humans, a rhythm for the ship, a rhythm for the future. And although the star outside continued its slow death, inside the Velaris, a quiet, steady hope had begun to bloom, one that would carry them farther than any engine ever could. Mara smiled to herself, realizing that history was quietly being rewritten, not in records, not in battles, not in laws, but in 3 small meals each day, shared with courage and care, by a boy who understood more than anyone else that life's true strength was measured in compassion. The Velaris shuddered as the dying star outside pulsed violently, throwing waves of energy against the ship's hull. The golden light flared through the viewports, turning the corridors into streaks of molten color. The alarms rang in chaotic symphony, warning of surging radiation, failing shields, and fluctuating gravity. Panic gripped the crew, but amidst the chaos, Erix moved calmly, his small form steady against the trembling floor. Smoke filled the corridors, and the heat made the metal walls unbearably hot to touch. Crew members screamed. Some ran blindly and others froze, unsure which path would lead to safety. Most species aboard the Velaris were larger, stronger, and far more intimidating than Erix, yet here he was, small and fragile in appearance, moving through danger with quiet determination. A loud explosion rocked the ship, sending Erix sprawling against the wall. Pain shot through his body, bruising and rattling him, but he did not stay down. He rose, shaking the dust from his shoulders, eyes fixed on the crew members struggling in the corridors. His instinct was not for survival alone, it was for others. He guided humans and aliens alike, showing them which paths were safe, helping the injured rise, and handing out what little supplies he could carry. Mara saw him drag a wounded officer through the chaos, his small arms straining under the weight. "Erix, wait, you're too small to do this," she shouted, racing to help. He turned, his breath heavy, and gave her a look that carried no fear. "I may be small," he said, voice steady despite the roar of the ship, "but courage is not measured by size." The star outside flared again, sending a wave of energy through the ship, knocking over consoles and throwing crew members to the floor. Systems flickered and died, leaving corridors in shadows. Some aliens panicked, screaming for orders, for guidance, for someone else to take charge. Yet Erix moved on, following a rhythm that no one else could see. 3 times a day he ate. 3 times a day he shared. And now, in this moment of fear, he acted 3 times as fast, 3 times as decisively, 3 times with the heart of someone much older than his appearance suggested. Mara grabbed his arm, desperate to slow him down. "You can't save everyone," she cried, fear breaking through her calm. Erix shook his head gently. "I don't have to save everyone," he said. "I only have to save the ones I can reach. That is enough." He pulled a trembling alien child from beneath a fallen beam, guided an injured officer to the emergency hatch, and lifted a smaller human out of the path of a collapsing wall. Each act was quiet, almost invisible in the chaos, yet each carried a weight far greater than the alarms or explosions surrounding them. Crew members began to follow his example almost without realizing it. Humans and aliens alike, inspired by his courage and calm, started helping each other. They shared water, comforted the frightened, and carried those too weak to move. The fear that had been so heavy began to lift, replaced by a fragile sense of unity. Erix had shown them how small acts, when done with intention and care, could ripple outward, turning panic into hope. By the time the Velaris stabilized enough to reach the emergency hatches, the ship had endured tremendous damage. Yet no one doubted they would survive the immediate danger. And though Erix himself was bruised, exhausted, and barely able to stand, his calm presence had saved more lives than anyone could count. Mara looked at him, awe and gratitude filling her eyes. You didn't panic," she said softly. "You could have run, hidden, saved yourself." Erix smiled faintly, a small gesture that carried the weight of centuries of wisdom. "Panic never saves anyone," he said. "Only action, guided by care, can change the outcome." And in that moment, as the Velaris floated battered but alive amidst the dying star's violent light, every crew member aboard understood something profound. Survival was not just about engines or shields, not just about protocols or strength. It was about courage. It was about heart. And the small alien boy who ate 3 times a day and shared with intention had just shown them all what that truly meant. The Velaris floated in the shadow of the dying star, battered and trembling. Smoke still curled through the corridors, alarms flashed intermittently, and the ship's engines groaned as they struggled to maintain orbit. The emergency lights cast long, flickering shadows over the crew, highlighting exhaustion and fear etched on every face. Supplies were critically low. Escape pods were limited. And now, the command officers faced the hardest decision of their lives. Someone had to remain behind to stabilize the core long enough for the rest of the crew to evacuate. The council debated fiercely. Aliens with thick carapaces and towering figures argued with booming voices, calculating odds, analyzing data, and citing probabilities. Humans argued with passion, pleading for a solution that could save as many lives as possible. Yet every plan came back to the same grim conclusion. Someone had to stay. Someone had to risk everything. The crew expected volunteers. Some stepped forward immediately, driven by duty or courage. Others argued for protocol to decide. And then, unexpectedly, Eric stepped forward. A hush fell over the chamber. All eyes turned to the small alien boy. He was bruised from the previous chaos, his body marked by smoke and debris. He had already guided the crew through unimaginable danger, yet he now stood calmly, unwavering, and offered himself to remain behind. Command stared at him. "You are not required," one officer said, his voice firm, almost incredulous. "You are too small, too young, too untested." Eric shook his head gently. "I know," he said. His voice was soft, yet carried a quiet authority that silenced every other argument. "That is exactly why it matters." Mara rushed forward, her eyes wide with fear. "No, you can't. You'll die if you stay," she shouted, grasping his small shoulders. He looked at her, unafraid, unflinching, his eyes calm pools of conviction. "3 times a day," he said, "life has asked me who I am becoming. This is my answer." The room fell silent. Not a single officer, human or alien, could speak. The choice he made was not demanded by protocol, not requested by command. It was entirely his own. And in that choice, every crew member recognized something remarkable: courage born from conviction, selflessness born from understanding, and wisdom that transcended age or species. Eric's moved toward the control chamber, his small form disappearing into the smoke-filled corridors. Every step was deliberate, each movement steady despite the chaos surrounding him. He worked alone to stabilize the core, monitoring energy flows, rerouting power, and holding failing systems together. Sweat ran down his face, but he did not falter. Every calculation, every adjustment, every action was precise and intentional. Outside, the crew prepared to evacuate. They watched through the observation ports, hearts clenched, as the star flared violently again, threatening to tear the Velaris apart. And inside, Erix worked tirelessly, a small figure against the roaring power of the dying sun, proving that bravery was not measured in size or strength, but in the willingness to act when everything else demanded fear. When the last escape pod launched, Erix's image lingered in the minds of every human aboard. Small, determined, and unyielding. He had given them life, safety, and a lesson they would never forget. They had survived not because the ship was strong, not because the alarms had worked, and not because the star had not burned brighter than any had imagined. They had survived because one boy chose to become more than himself. And as the Velaris drifted away from the star, shaken and scarred, the memory of Erix remained alive in every heart. Mara wept quietly, her hand pressed to the viewport. "You've shown us what humanity truly means," she whispered. Somewhere in the depths of the failing ship, Erix continued his work. Alone but unwavering. 3 times a day he had eaten. 3 times a day he had shared. And now he acted one final time, giving the most important gift, courage that would echo across generations. Years passed since the Velaris had escaped the collapsing star. The crew had rebuilt, colonies had been established, and the story of that fateful day became a quiet legend whispered among humans and aliens alike. Yet the memory of Erix, the small alien boy who had stayed behind, remained vivid in every mind he had touched. His courage, his selflessness, and the simple rhythm of his life, eating and sharing 3 times a day, had changed the way humans saw themselves and each other. Humans told their children of him. They did not describe a hero with weapons or power, but a boy who acted with care and wisdom. They taught that true strength was measured not by size or intelligence or dominance, but by compassion, by patience, and by the courage to act when fear threatened to paralyze the world. Colonies on distant planets learned the lesson quickly. Scarce resources were shared. Communities survived famines that should have destroyed them. Humans endured crises that would have broken other species. And always at the heart of every story was the quiet discipline of a boy who believed life spoke 3 times a day and demanded that each person answer with intention and kindness. Even aliens began to notice. At first they were skeptical. Many mocked the idea that a small, gentle species could survive harsher environments while stronger ones failed. But they could not ignore the results. Human settlements flourished where others crumbled. Conflicts were resolved with dialogue and patience rather than violence. And whenever humans met alien communities, they carried lessons learned from Eryx: generosity, resilience, and the courage to care for one another. Mara Hale, older now and regarded as one of the wisest officers of her generation, often visited training halls and classrooms to tell the story. She would look into the eager eyes of young humans and aliens alike and say, "It is not engines, shields, or weapons that will save you in times of crisis. It is your heart. It is your courage. And sometimes it is one small act repeated over and over, just 3 times a day, that can change everything." Every colony, every crew, every survivor understood this. They carried it quietly at first as a guiding principle during difficult times, and slowly it became more than guidance. It became culture. The principle of 3 times a day observe life, share life, and act with heart was passed down. Rituals of kindness, sharing, and discipline emerged naturally, a quiet ripple spreading across human civilizations. And yet, even with all this change, there remained a sense of mystery. No one knew if Eryx had survived the final moments aboard the Velaris. Some said he had been consumed by the star, a hero lost to the flames. Others whispered that perhaps he had been carried elsewhere by forces they could not understand. But it no longer mattered. Whether alive or gone, the impact of his life had reached farther than any human or alien could have predicted. One evening, on a distant colony with 2 suns rising over the horizon, a small human child sat quietly, eating her meal carefully, dividing it into 3 portions. She offered one portion to a stray alien creature, smiled, and whispered softly, "This is what courage looks like." And in that moment, generations later, the spirit of Eryx lived again. History began to be rewritten, not in books of conquest or battle, but in stories of quiet heroism, in acts of sharing, in lives made better by discipline and care. Humans survived where others failed, not because they were stronger, faster, or smarter, but because they had learned how to be human. And the lesson came from the smallest, most unassuming being they had ever met. Eryx had taught them that survival was not enough. To truly live, to truly shape the future, one had to act with heart, to inspire, and to leave a mark that could ripple through generations. His legacy was not in victories or medals, but in the quiet courage of every human and alien who remembered that life speaks 3 times a day, and each answer matters. Centuries had passed since the Velaris had faced the dying star. Humanity had spread across countless systems, building colonies, forging alliances, and surviving disasters that would have destroyed other species. And yet, amidst all their achievements, there remained one constant lesson, repeated in classrooms, council chambers, and homes across the galaxy. The story of Eryx, the small alien boy whose courage had changed everything. No one knew for certain whether Eryx had survived the collapse of the Velaris. Some believed he had perished in the flames, a quiet hero lost to history. Others whispered that he had been carried away, perhaps by forces beyond understanding, to witness new worlds and new civilizations. Yet it no longer mattered. His influence had endured. His discipline, his compassion, and his courage had left a mark on humanity that no technology, no weapon, and no policy could erase. Everywhere humans settled, the principle of 3 times a day became a silent law of life. First, observe. Take a moment to see the world around you, to recognize the lives that intersect with your own. Second, share. Give of yourself, whether it is food, comfort, or knowledge, to those who need it. Third, act with courage. Stand for what is right, even when fear threatens to overwhelm you. It was simple, yet powerful, and it had saved humanity more times than anyone could count. Alien species, once skeptical of human resilience, had begun to take notice. Where humans thrived, others faltered. Entire civilizations that had been considered superior in strength and strategy failed to endure the challenges of famine, war, and cosmic disaster. Humans survived. Humans endured. And humans thrived, not because of weapons or dominance, but because they had learned to act with heart. Mara Hale, now a revered figure in galactic history, often told the story to new recruits and young colonists. Her voice would soften as she recounted Erix's calm determination during the star's collapse, the quiet moments when he shared his small portions of food, and the ultimate choice he had made to remain behind to save the crew. Courage, she would say, does not always roar. Sometimes it is the quiet voice that speaks in the face of impossible odds, saying, "I will do what must be done." Across human civilizations, schools taught children to divide and share their meals, to notice those in need, and to act with courage, even in the smallest ways. Communities flourished. Conflicts were resolved with dialogue and understanding. Colonies survived disasters that should have destroyed them, and all of it traced back to a small, quiet alien boy who had believed in the power of intention and kindness. Legends grew, not of battlefields or kings, but of meals shared, hands held, and courage offered when the world seemed against you. Statues of Erix appeared in colonies and cities, showing a small figure holding a simple tray, smiling quietly, teaching the greatest lesson of all. Strength is measured not in might but in heart. One day, on a distant human colony orbiting twin suns, a group of children sat quietly in the morning light, each dividing their simple meal into 3 portions. They shared with their friends, whispered comforting words to a small alien creature, and prepared for the day with courage and purpose. And in that moment, though centuries had passed, the spirit of Erix lived again. Somewhere perhaps in the endless reaches of space, Erix's soul, or whatever remained of him, watched quietly. Not seeking praise or recognition, not demanding honor or reward, he would have been content to see the world he had touched continue to grow. Humanity had not only survived, it had become worthy of survival. It had learned that life's true power lay in compassion, discipline, and the courage to act when everything else demanded fear. And in the archives of galactic history, there is a single line written about that day aboard the Velaris. The age of domination ended not with a war, but with a meal shared 3 times a day. History, in the end, remembered not the weapons, not the battles, not the policies. It remembered the heart of a small alien boy who had chosen to act with intention, who had taught humans to share, to care, and to rise above fear. And so the galaxy changed, quietly, steadily, forever, because someone had eaten 3 times a day, shared what little he had, and shown the universe the meaning of courage.